Hello everyone and welcome back to Art History Shorts. So I'm going to be ending the short series I did on mythological stories depicted in art with Cézanne's Leda and the Swan, which he painted around 1880. The myth that this painting depicts centers around Leda, who was the queen of Sparta, and Zeus, who, if you aren't familiar with Greek and Roman mythology, has a wandering eye and desires beautiful women outside of his marriage to the Greek goddess Hera. In an attempt to sneak behind Hera's back, he turns himself into a swan and goes to Leda. Zeus, as a swan, either seduces or rapes Leda, depending on the version of the story you hear, and also in the same day, Leda sleeps with her husband. She becomes pregnant by both men and later lays 2 eggs. One egg hatches Zeus's children, Helen and Pollux, and yes, she is that Helen, and the other hatches the king of Sparta's children, Castor and Clytemnestra. Castor and Pollux are the twins that form the constellation Gemini, and Clytemnestra later marries King Agamemnon and kills him when he returns from the Trojan War. Helen and her beauty are, of course, at the center of that war. There are actually many myths that center around Zeus transforming himself to seduce, deceive, or rape women, and also sometimes beautiful young men, too. He impersonated Hades, appearing before Persephone. He transformed into a satyr before Antiope, as a shepherd before Mnemosyne, and he also took the form of an ant, an eagle, a bull, and a rain of gold in different stories. This myth is one that has interested both writers and painters throughout history, and still today. The story was included in the Iliad, the Odyssey, the Aeneid, and also Metamorphoses, as well as other ancient Greek texts. And there are a number of paintings of this myth from the Renaissance period that I wanted to mention because they contrast so interestingly with Cézanne's depiction. Many of the paintings of Leda and the Swan from the Renaissance depict this myth in an erotic or a loving way. We either see the Swan/Zeus with Leda explicitly, or Leda with her arm wrapped around the swan, looking lovingly at her offspring. It's not until later art periods do we see a change in how this myth is shown. The way art was created and for who has changed over time. In the Renaissance, your patron was often the church or the wealthy, and as an artist, you were often painting for other people. They did gain some freedom in what they could paint with the surge of classical knowledge from ancient Greece and Rome, and took advantage of these stories and myths to show more scandalous subject matters. Many of these paintings were commissioned by wealthy male patrons to hang in their private collections, and many wealthy male patrons wanted to look at beautiful young women in the nude. I go into this more in my video on the Venus of Urbino by Titian, and the series I did on the female nude figure if you're interested. Later, artists had more freedom and could paint for themselves as their options grew with who would buy their art or where they could show their art. And it's not until later in time, when restrictions on culture become looser, that we see more nuanced interpretations of this myth. We see in Cézanne's rendition a Leda that doesn't look as excited by the encounter as she is depicted in the Renaissance paintings. He has the swan biting her wrist, a sign of violence, and we get the hint that this isn't a sensual act of a woman being seduced by a swan. Certainly, she is still posed in a sensual position, but the look on her face kind of clashes with that pose. We certainly don't see Leda in an explicit position where there is little question as to what is happening between her and the swan. Instead, we see Leda's expression, which I interpret as a resigned annoyance. It's important when viewing art to think both about the historical context of when it was created and also what the viewer brings to that piece. We can't completely separate ourselves from the time we are viewing the artwork in. So, for example, hearing or viewing this myth today, it's easy to bring our modern thoughts around consent to it and interpreting Leda's expression in this way. But I do feel it is safe to say that this is one of the few depictions of Leda and the Swan that suggests this isn't a sensual or welcomed encounter. And other interpretations like this are also more modern. For the background of this painting, Cézanne has placed Leda and the Swan in a natural setting. They are not outside by a lake or in a nature of any kind. They are surrounded by all this blue, the color of water, but they are clearly indoors in a setting that looks posed. This unnatural setting for a swan in a blue interior with sheets and pillows mimics the unnaturalness of what this scene is depicting. The composition is also unbalanced. We've got this gap of space on the right here that makes the scene feel a bit off and lopsided. So I also wanted to draw attention to Cézanne's painting style. He was a post-impressionist painter, and his work is considered to be a bridge between Impressionism and how those artists tried to capture a moment in time, and the art movements to come, like Fauvism, Cubism, and Expressionism, that move further into abstraction. Cézanne was more methodical than Impressionist artists in his approach to painting and used color and form to construct his subjects. When we look at Leda and the Swan, which was painted during his mature period, we can see the layers of paint and the colors that he uses built up over each other. I also love this triangle of gold from Leda's hair to the pillow tassel to the swan beak biting her wrist. The swan's expression is flat. All the emotion is coming from Leda. And as I've mentioned in other videos, the use of a triangle in a composition is very powerful, and it keeps the viewer's eye moving inside the work. And every time we are drawn back to Leda's face and her expression. Cézanne was more well known for his portraits, still lifes, and landscapes, and this sensual pose of a nude figure wasn't a common subject matter for him, which for me makes his choices even more interesting when viewing this painting, which you can do if you're in Philadelphia and visit the Barnes Museum, which if you love Impressionism and Post-Impressionism, I would highly recommend this museum to you. So I hope you enjoyed this brief look at Cézanne's Leda and the Swan and exploring Greek myth in art. I have some new ideas for the channel that I'm excited to work on, but if there's ever any work of art you're interested in, pop it in the comments. Also, if you want to see more, consider subscribing to the channel. It always means a lot to me. And thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.